When we began, I said that there's things that the state and I agree upon that they have to rule out beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. We're going to cover a good story about what reasonable doubt is and how you can evaluate it, but let's go through these key points. The first one is this impossible timeline. All right? So the state just had this very fancy, very nice PowerPoint. Clearly, I'm not, it would take years for me to do something like that. But this is what they showed you. They showed you that the kids get back from soccer at 6:30. That's not what Angela said. And I'm the one that actually called Angela, though they knew about her in 2001. She spoke with Buddy Neesmith. The way that you need to think about who Angela is and how important she is to this whole case, she's the last person to see Sherri alive outside of then Sherri going home. She's the last person to see Sherri alive outside of all these other people that testified. She's a completely independent witness. No reason for her to have any kind of memory that's different than anybody else. And like I said, they knew about her in 2001. They knew about how important she was. But what she says is, Sherri's with me at the 5-year-old soccer practice, not the 11-year-old soccer practice that occurs later on that day. And Sherri leaves with the 5-year-olds at 6:30. What happens is Greg is the one who actually picks up the older kids, Jacob and Gregory, at roughly 7:15, 7:20, and he gets back at 7:30. All right? Twilight around this time is about 7:15, 7:10. So it's not going to get dark until 7:40, 8 o'clock. But when Greg gets back, the kids go inside. There's pizza already there. You know who ordered the pizza because Sherri's already home. There's all these kids, the cousins are over, they're having a great time, they're playing video games and messing around. And Greg's outside, working on the van, working with this compressor, and soon thereafter, Sherri says, I'm going to the store. That's what some of the kids hear, and that's what they tell the investigators at that time, back in '01, and I need to talk to your dad. What the kids tell the investigator at that time, and Neesmith was very clear, and I would suggest to y'all that if anybody's not trying to change his own memory and is anybody who's being forthright, what I mean is there are times when I'm asking a witness to answer some questions and they're fighting me tooth and nail. They're coming up with whatever excuse they can. Neesmith wasn't like that. There's a moment where I'm saying, hey, didn't Greg actually tell you the night of the 22nd when y'all are doing this interview down at the juvenile justice system that Jennifer brought the lawnmower over? And he says, I don't remember, and I show him his handwritten notes. He's like, yeah, you're right. You're right. I didn't remember. That's what happened. He's trying to be forthright. This is 2 decades ago. Some of these other people will go over. They're not. But Neesmith says something very important. He says, listen, we knew back then that it's not a good idea to continually interview these kids because we were concerned that the outside people, including Tina Leak, and especially Tina Leak, was implanting memory. It's just a logical possibility that if you're around little kids and you're talking about something over and over again, that their mind may adapt what you're saying. So that's why it was so important to know what the kids said at the time. And what the kids said at the time is when their mom goes out, Greg comes back in within 10 to 15 minutes, and there's not a speck of blood on him. His clothes are dirty, as if he is working on something outside. There's nothing wrong with him. And you know how accurate this is? When Jacob was asked, because the state didn't ask him this, I asked him this. When Jacob was asked, what do you remember Greg wearing when you saw him come back in outside? Jacob says, camo pants, white Reebok shoes, and a red tank top. On September 26, when they go and do this search warrant at the house, you know what they take? Camo pants, white Reeboks, and the red tank top. So essentially 4 days after the body's discovered, law enforcement knows the clothes that the kids are telling them that Greg had, and they took them. But as part of this parade of errors, NCIS doesn't test those clothes for a decade later. And when they do test them, there's not a speck of blood on any of them. So this has to be the state's theory. She goes outside. Okay, now we're talking more like 7:45 in reality. She talks to Greg for at least, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 minutes. Greg already has changed clothes from what he previously had on, and somehow that doesn't alarm or question Sherri. Greg then gets her into this van, shoots her twice, uses paper towels to clean up all this blood that would have been over him, because you're going to see. And there's blood all over the place. These are the actual, almost you can say Polaroids from the crime scene. You'll see blood all over the doors. Blood all over the doors. Blood on the seats. There's blood all over her. The pictures that they then take at the autopsy, and to be very fair, they're horrific pictures, but you'll see the amount of blood that was all over her. It's logical to understand, it's reasonable to understand if someone gets shot in the head, there's tons of blood everywhere. All right, so Greg shoots her, mashes her down, completely cleans himself, changes his clothes, stages all this stuff being gone, taken, somehow puts that into grocery bags, which I would submit is not the best bag to use in some kind of murder plot. And then he comes back inside the house, sneaks out a window, drives the van to the Winn-Dixie, gets picked up like that. I mean, you got to imagine how fast of a pickup that must be. I mean, that's like a NASCAR pit stop kind of thing. He can't wait minutes in that car for whoever's picking him up, for the Jennifer Spohn story. And then he then drives back, gets out of the car, sneaks around the back of the house, comes back in through this window, and voila. All that has to happen, as the state told you, in 10 to 15 minutes. How is that worldly possible? No possible way could that happen. This is all going on while you have 7 kids in the house. There's no way that can work. And that's what the kids said at the time. It wasn't like Greg's back in the shower for 30 minutes. They said he was back there for 10 to 15 minutes. Now, these 7 kids never said anything about Greg being suspicious when he came in. Never said anything about having suspicions about the shower. The moment in time where things start getting odd, the moment in time where things are out of the normal and out of whack, is when Jennifer shows up with this lawnmower. That's the point in time that the story diverges. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Jennifer. But how is this possible? These 7 kids in the house, and he has this whole planned out murder. Why would you plan out a murder when you're going to have all the kids there? You're told that the 2 other cousins were there because the leaks went to the khaki ball. It would be reasonable to understand that Greg would know that. That Greg would know that 2 of these cousins are going to be there. Why would he kill his wife if this is part of this master plan? A master plan that had duped not just the state government, but the federal government for 2 decades because Greg was watching Investigative Discovery. How ridiculous does that sound? There's no way that works, and that's a reasonable doubt that they cannot rule about the evidence. And this is where you start to really see this parade of errors. All right. So look. Lee Smith told us something else. He said it was odd at the time they had this crime scene unit that was basically doing their own thing, that they didn't really have control over. They were autonomous. They were making their own decisions. All right? September 22nd, 01 is when the body's discovered. You know when they finally send in Sherri's clothes and that ME kit to develop a standard and to see if there's any other people that could be associated with the ME kit, her fingernails, all this kind of stuff that would be probably important to a murder investigation? That doesn't happen until That doesn't happen until 11 months later. This is a murder investigation. It takes them 11 months for them to send the ME kit that had the blood and the fingernail clippings and all that kind of stuff to FDLE, including her clothes. But what happens, because these guys are out doing their own thing, nothing is tested. All they did was take Sherri's blood and develop what's called a blood cart. That's it. They didn't test her clothes. All right? So then we move on. Buddy Neesmith was very clear. He told us in the 2004-2005 time frame, they're disassembling the van. They're literally taking the van apart, not just at the sheriff's office. They take it to this special facility at NCIS, and he tells us very clearly, we were looking for two things, actually. We were looking for the projectile, and projectile, this is what we're talking about. A bullet's got two parts. You got what we call the shell casing. That's where the powder and the primer is at. Then you have the projectile. That's what actually comes out of the barrel. So every time we're saying projectile, that's what we're talking about. But in 2004, 2005, they're looking for it because they don't realize that they already have it in evidence because it wasn't labeled correctly. When the crime scene people took it, they didn't label it correctly. How do we know that to be sure? Well, Dr. Farmer, who testified, said very frankly, I originally thought the shot that went here to here was connected, A to B. And not that I originally think that, that's what I originally put in my report. But realizing now, because I was told, this is literally what he said to y'all, I was told a couple days ago that that was wrong, that they actually have finally now tested the fragment that they found in the first court proceeding, because I'm the one that brought it up, and we'll talk about this a little bit more with how you can judge the credibility of Smeester. And I would submit to you that this is because of Smeester. He tried to distance himself from what was going on by saying I was only support, but Neesmith was very clear. 2004, 2005, that's when he comes into the picture. But they're taking apart the van. They don't realize that they already had the projectile. 2006, something else really important happens, and the state and I actually do agree on something. Jennifer did have the keys. She had the keys to the van. Now, the state tried to make you think that I'm not being forthright when I asked Smeester, hey, didn't y'all fingerprint those keys? And he said, yeah, we did. The reason I was bringing that up is because something else happens just the same in 2006. The shell casing that they find in the autopsy, which no doubt, right, no doubt is related to this case, they send it up to the Army Crime Lab, and instead of running DNA on it, they put it in this super glue vacuum chamber that coats the whole thing with super glue so they could try to run fingerprints. Now, y'all heard about DNA over and over again. You touch something, there's a chance that you're going to leave some DNA, so you come and do a swab on that thing, that's what you test. Do you think you can pull DNA if I covered this surface with super glue? Brian Higgins, even told you, but he didn't tell you all this until I had to start questioning him, that he actually even made a note of that. In 08, he makes a note, oh no, we super glued this shell casing. And when they actually test the shell casing, guess what they find? Nothing. If Jennifer Spohn's DNA is on that shell casing, would we be in trial right now? Seriously, would we be in trial right now if her DNA is on that shell casing? But yet again, they don't know what they're doing, and that's another big problem. Here we go. 08. Finally, close to a decade later, finally, they're now running Greg's clothes. And what they realize when they run Greg's clothes is there's not a speck of blood on any of the clothes that they've had since September 26, 2001. And they actually realize, or Cecile, that Army Crime Lab, around the same time gets Greg's buccal swab. So they could have a profile for Greg. They don't develop a profile, they don't actually run it for whatever reason, but this is what they know in 2008. (2008 to 2011), nothing real big forensically is happening except this wild story that Smeester and this guy named Agent Fox kind of kook up together that Jennifer's child, which everybody said Jennifer was pregnant before she even gets involved romantically with Greg. Jennifer herself told you about that. The baby's daddy was in jail before she gets involved with Greg. But Smeester and Fox, they kook up this idea that Jennifer's child, which she has later on, his name is Lewis, must be from Greg. That must be Greg's motivation. Because a divorce, and we're going to talk about that, ain't that really great of a motivation. How many people get divorces? Tons. Rich people get divorces. Jeff Bezos had a divorce. He didn't kill his wife.
Objection, facts, not in evidence.
So the idea of a divorce being a motivation, we'll talk about that, that's very poor. That's what they were doing. They were trying to develop this other motivation. So they're sneaking around, collecting cups and forks and cigarettes that they associate to Greg and Jennifer, though they already had Greg's buccal swab, had been sitting down at ECSO for a decade. They then get this stuff, and instead of running some of it at the crime lab, the Army Crime Lab, they send Greg's stuff out to this private lab over here called Bodie. Why would they send the stuff to a private lab when they could run it right there? Why? That's some questionable conduct. But that's what they do. And this whole time, as I said in my opening, they're doing stuff that's meaningless. They get the results back, and lo and behold, yes, Greg's not the father. They would have known that. They would have known it would have been medically impossible for that to happen. But that's what they do. And then lo and behold, in 2011, Meester realizes that they never have tested Sherri's clothes. He knows how important that is because Sherri is mashed down in the seat. There's no doubt that after she is killed, she's manipulated down. Finally, they realize, okay, yeah, we got to run the clothes. So they send the clothes out, and a lady named Lisa Hobgood tests the clothes. And you know what they find? They find that there's 2 other people on her shorts. Not in the area that they told you that had blood on it, right? They were trying to search areas that would be susceptible for investigation to determine other people. And then they have a little diagram that they showed you of where they actually did the swabs. 2 mixtures, okay? The report she issues says, I need standards to figure out who these 2 other people are. Though the whole time they had Greg's DNA. They didn't run it. But they did run something else. They ran some random blood that they questioned Mr. Remus and said, well, could that be a quality assurance? And he said, I don't know. No one from that crime lab, not Mr. Higgins or Mrs. Hobgood, has got in front of y'all and said that was a quality assurance. Mr. Crawford's all wrong. Mr. Remus was all wrong. They're way out of line here. That was what it was. They didn't do that. They asked Jack what it was. He says, I don't know what it is. It's not normally a quality assurance because normally the manufacturer has its own special liquid called an allylic ladder. This is the actual data that came from those DNA runs back then. What you're going to see on the left-hand side, y'all can pass it around so everybody can see it. You're going to see what's called a ladder. And you're going to see when they test this stuff called a ladder, it pops up all the markers at all the different DNA points. That is the quality control. That is the actual special liquid that they use to test the machine. Because what the machine...
Facts, not an evidence.
That's the allylic ladder. And as you can see, when they're testing it, it's popping up every point. Is it reasonable to believe that when you're trying to see if the machine's working right, you're going to test every point at every loci to make sure you can count them all, to make sure that the machine catches them all? But when we were doing our examination, these documents got a little bit out of order. And you're going to see at the top of that particular document a date, May 2011. And I put them in order because you can look at the bottom right-hand side and you can see that the pages on that one, I believe, are 1 through 11. And what you'll see on those pages is in May 2011, they're testing that blood against the shorts. When they're actually testing samples, and they're doing runs, you'll see what they're running. Right here, you'll see they're running that blood again. All right? If you keep those pages in order, you'll see how they're running things chronologically. And you'll see in May 2011, at the same time they're running Sherri's shorts, they're running that blood. Why would you use a control to test it against a piece of evidence. Why would you do that? I mean, you're trying to figure out if the machine's working right, not trying to figure out if what you're running is connected to the evidence. And here's the kicker. I told y'all that that particular run was done in May 2011. You can see the date up on it. Here's the June 2nd run. These pages are in order too. You can pass it down. On the bottom right, y'all will see the pages, 1 of 9. June 2011, you know what they're doing again? They're running that blood against the shorts again. If that's a quality control, why are they running it 2 times against the shorts again? And I'll tell you why. Because as Mrs. Hobgood told us, there was actually 2 reports. There was a report that she was going to do June 3rd, and then she had to revise it. And I would submit to you, the reason that we had these 2 reports and the reason that there was these suggestions of revisal is because they knew about this blood.
Objection, facts not in evidence.
You guys at the end of the day are going to be testing who's telling you the fair story, credibility. As we discussed in the beginning, what y'all are called are the finders of fact. You're testing credibility. What are the odds that some random blood that for whatever reason they're using to see if the machine is running right matches Sherri at every point they can do a comparison? What are the odds that some random blood that they never document where it comes from or whose blood it is absolutely included at every point in Sherri's DNA in this mixture? What are the odds of that? Just some random blood they're running all of a sudden completely connects to the case? That's Powerball odds. That's better, crazier than Powerball odds. But that's the truth. Now, they never say that. They never come out and say who 46 is, where they got it from, but instead they give this revised report and they say we need standards, though they already had Greg's and they already had Sherri's. The person they didn't go and get was Jennifer's. But they're also trying to do this paternity, which means that they would be trying to get stuff connected to Jennifer, and they didn't know that 2 years afterwards. Remember, they're doing the paternity stuff 2010, 2011, the lady's saying, I need standards. Wouldn't you know? And has anybody come in court and said, we actually did run Jennifer against the shorts and she's excluded too? No one said that. What they say is essentially 20 years later, after we have the first court proceeding, is when they finally decide to test Greg's buccal swab against that mixture, and he is absolutely excluded. And they test all these people that could be around Sherri too, the kids, the Leaks, Lisa Leak, Jeff Leak. They test all these possible people that could be around her. They're all excluded also. So in the evidence itself, it shows you Greg was not connected. He was not involved. But they didn't go through all the time and the effort to test Jennifer. All right. The state's presentation, which was fancy, pops up in the moving, essentially said Greg had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. What I want to do with y'all is I want to do like a report card, like a check of if we grade Jennifer's means, motive, and opportunity against Greg, who comes out the right one? You know, they made the decision to give Jennifer immunity. And I would submit to you what really happened is Mr. Smeester, who tried to distance himself from all this stuff, who wasn't forthright, and we know he wasn't forthright because I asked him, hey man, y'all never knew about this projectile until I brought it up in the first court proceeding. He says, no, we knew. Well, if that's the case, why did someone during the proceedings run down to the sheriff's evidence vault, go through it, find it, figure out that it wasn't labeled right, relabel it, and then why is it after the first court proceeding is when the tests are done to figure out what fragment connects to what fragment, and then after that test is done, only days later, is Dr. Farmer told, hey, we now know what happened, we now kind of got it right, you're going to have to change your opinion. Does that jive with more my story, that they had no idea that that fragment was there until I brought it up in the first court proceeding? Or does that jive with more Smeester's story, that yeah, we knew it was there. We just ran and put our hands on it. We just had to go put our eyes on it. What does that jive with? My story that they didn't realize and they figured it out in that first court proceeding and then they ran over there and started doing all this stuff? Smeester has not been that credible because even when I'm saying, hey man, you guys went up there with this purpose and intent to essentially convince her, not just convince her, to pressure her to tell this story. And before you even get there, you give her this hypothetical. But what happens, their whole plan, 2 decades later, was to have Greg arrested the day they're up there, day one. But for whatever reason, that doesn't go right? He wasn't arrested the day they're up there. They don't arrest him until that night. And what they do the first day, the day that Jennifer denies any involvement, denies knowing anything, denies a gun, all this kind of stuff, they tell her at the very end, listen, one, here's this hypothetical. Somebody picks somebody up and brings them back and blah, blah, blah. That's the hypothetical. But two, there's 2 paths this can go. This can have, it's chiming in for me. This can have very negative consequences for the rest of your life, or you get to walk free. Walk free as she's walking right now. And then, at night, she sees Greg is arrested, comes back in, tells them, hey, I saw Greg's arrested. Smeester wouldn't even agree with that. I don't know if she saw or knew that Greg was arrested. Of course she did. That was y'all's whole intent. That was your whole plan. But she sees Greg's arrested. She comes back in and she tells y'all that night she knew she was going to talk. She knew she was going to say whatever they needed her to say because she wants to walk free. Okay, so I'm going to use J for Jennifer, G for Greg. We're going to do the first thing. Opportunity. So this night, Greg has 7 kids in the house. All this stuff's happening, pizza, kids are taking showers. It's as you imagine pandemonium. And if y'all need to understand what kind of house we're talking about, this is the house. I mean, it's your average, normal, 1-story home. So they got 7 kids, all this going on. And y'all who have kids, y'all know one thing is Very true. You can't walk outside to go check the mail without something happening. Your kid coming out to see what's going on, or wanting to come with you, or being curious, looking out windows. There's 7 of these kids, 14 eyes. That's the kind of opportunity that the state's saying. And he has to do all this, clean himself to the point where after 2 decades they don't find any blood on him. He has to do all this in 15 minutes. That's his opportunity. Or we have Jennifer Spohn, who knows where she lives, knows the car she drives, knows the area, only lives roughly less than 10 minutes away. When I asked her, hey, you have access to firearms, she says yes. When I say, hey, listen, your mom had a small handgun that she would use to put down dogs and this kind of dog breeding she was doing. Her answer wasn't, that's outrageous, what are you talking about? Her answer was, not in Florida. What does that mean? Is the gun not in Florida anymore? So, as far as opportunity, I would say Jennifer's a little bit higher. But if we want to be fair, we can say it's a draw. And this is what I want y'all to think about. Let's put Jennifer in that seat over there. And let's say the evidence lays out just the same way it laid out in this case. Would they have been proving that Jennifer committed a crime, a murder? Absolutely.
Objection. It's not Jennifer's trial.
You know why it's not Jennifer's trial? Because they gave her full immunity. That's why it's not Jennifer's trial. Means, all right, Jennifer is pregnant with this guy who's in jail. She's flat broke. She has nothing. She's about to get kicked out of her house. She's taking care of not just herself, but her mother and her sister. She said that she was at the lowest point she's ever been. She said that financially, she 100% needed Greg. She said Greg was stable, he was reliable, he was safe. She needed him to survive. That's what was going on. She had the means to do it because she had all the area that she needed. And the state has said, listen, the shot had to happen on the passenger seat, and only Greg can convince Sherri to be in the passenger seat. You know who else could convince Sherri to move over to the passenger seat? Jennifer with a gun. That's somebody else that has a really good chance of convincing Jennifer to get to the passenger seat. And this is the other thing. Y'all can evaluate Jennifer's own credibility. You know, when I'm asking her questions, didn't you say this differently at this time? Didn't you actually say this? Didn't you say that? And she's saying, yeah. The state gets up and it basically says, Mr. Crawford's a big, scary guy, and Jennifer was just agreeing. I call her back. I call her back and say, listen, let's be fair to the jury. Is there anything out of all these transcripts that you want to review to make sure that I'm being accurate? No, there's nothing I want to change. That's what she said. Jennifer said, oh, some other time, though she's never said this before at these 7 different times that she's given this story. But in this trial, she said, oh, later on in time, Greg said he had to shoot her twice because the first shot didn't work. The state just told y'all in their own closing that either shot's fatal. Farmer, who didn't know how the fragments lined up because they never told him because they didn't test it until after the first hearing, said, absolutely, if there's one thing that's going to be absolutely equal, no matter what, either shot is fatal. So where'd that come from? Where that came from is Jennifer's story has morphed and morphed and morphed, and I would submit that when Smeester back in 2020 says, don't worry about testifying in court, we're going to have so many questions, we're going to talk to you so much that you're going to be good to go, you're going to be prepared. I would submit to you that they're using Jennifer to try to cover up any holes they got in the case. They basically have been giving Jennifer a shovel for the last year to cover up these holes. That's where you hear this, oh, he told me he shot twice. Oh, he told me, though I've never said, when I was talking to investigators, that there was a plan, and I never said that he was upset with his marriage, and I never said that we talked about divorce. Now she's saying, oh, he told me he had an unregistered gun. Why do you think that's now coming up on the 7th story? Do you think that's coming up because they never found a single connection between Greg and a .25 caliber? There's no receipt. They called all these gun show people, the fairground gun show. They were calling all of them. Not one of them had a connection between Greg and a .25. They ran Greg through the national database. No connection between Greg and .25. There's not a connection between Greg and .25 caliber ammo. They didn't find a single local connection, not a single store, not a single receipt. When they searched his house, not a single bit of anything that had anything to do with a .25. And I'll tell you that the kids, when they were talking about a small gun, it was the .380. It was the
Objection,
.380.
facts, not evidence.
I'm an overrule based on reasonable inferences, based on the facts. You can continue.
Thank you. It was the .380. It was the .380 that Smeester didn't want to tell you about. And when he finally said it was, oh yeah, it's another just, normal size gun. When I asked Jacob, hey, remember this .380? He didn't really recall it, and I would say his memory's been touched, tainted a little bit, but what he did say is, yeah, .380 is definitely smaller than a 9mm. That's the small gun. But the reason that they had her do all this is because they had to basically plug these holes. The whole reason they didn't arrest Greg and couldn't arrest Greg for 20 years, but Jennifer had all these things that she needed from Greg. She absolutely wins in the means. Here's the big one. Motive. Jennifer's sitting over there at that seat, and you're trying to evaluate who had the biggest motive. They're telling you Greg's motive is divorce. Something so common that at least 50% of our country goes through. That's Greg. And he didn't want to lose all this stuff. And, I'm not trying to be ugly, but this is what, this is an average home. Not something that you're losing a life's work over. This is an average home. You saw the van they had. These were enlisted military people. Middle class. But that was what they give you as Greg's motive. This is what Jennifer told you from her own mouth. Without him, I would not survive. Without Greg, I would have not have financially survived. When the state was asking her questions, she said, oh yeah, he gave me a couple hundred. No. She literally said, without him, I would not financially be able to make it. Who had the bigger motive? She's pregnant with somebody's kid who's in jail who wants nothing to do with her, losing the house, has no money, everything's gone. Every worldly possession that she would have was taken from her. She is at a low, flat broke, everything, horrible, horrible place. And alone comes Greg. And she says she was actually dating other people before she started seeing Greg. It's when she starts seeing Greg that she clues in, this is the guy that's going to pull me out of here. She's the big winner when it comes to motive. She wanted Sherri's life, so she took it. That's what this case is about. And the question that y'all are going to be asked, and the discussion that y'all are going to have is, has the state ruled this out beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt? Because the state made the decision in this case to give her full immunity and to charge Greg with first-degree murder. What that means in just simple Southern is their story has to be Greg's the shooter. There ain't no other way it could work. First-degree, premeditated murder, Greg has to be the shooter.
Objection, misstatement of the law.
All right, it's argument. Go ahead. Overrule.
Did y'all hear that? They got to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt he's the shooter. If Jennifer's over there, wouldn't the evidence equally prove that she's the one who did it, pulled the trigger, had the means, the opportunity, most importantly the motive, because she wanted that life and she decided to take it? Whatever happens, she's going to be walking free, because that's the decision they made. And I would submit to you that there's a reason they did this. And the reason they didn't arrest Greg for 20 years, the reason that he's excluded from every bit of forensic evidence, is because they had the Chris Deaton problem. See, Buddy Neesmith is kind of like this old school guy. But he says, listen, one of the things that I knew when I was in homicide is if you're going to find the witnesses and find the people, you got to go back to the same place at the same time. He even says, people work at night. They may work the night shift, but that's what Buddy does. After he interviews Greg, and Greg says, Jennifer came over, Greg didn't hide that. Like I said, that's the point things start getting weird. Buddy goes back to the Winn-Dixie, and that's where he meets Deaton. And Deaton tells Neesmith that day, I saw that van, saw it the night before, saw a lady inside of it, arguing with a male outside, short hair, 5'6". How tall is Jennifer Spohn? How tall is her? Is it possible she had her hair up because she's in the military? Is it possible that she had shorter hair at that time? Is it possible that Jennifer, as the state said, had the keys and someone helped her? Someone like Bob, who was around their house, who was someone Smeester knew about for 2 decades. Have you ever heard of them talking to Bob, figuring out who this guy is? No. But that's what Deaton sees. And what Deaton does is they show him a lineup. Back in 2001, he doesn't pick out Greg. 2008, they do the same thing. And this time, they actually take him there. And they again show him a lineup. And by 2008, he says, listen, basically just by odd chance, small town, I'm in this Mason Lodge, and I've actually now had a chance to see this guy in person, Greg Malarik. And that ain't the same person I saw. That ain't the same person I saw that night. So for 2 decades, they knew that they had this eyewitness who extremely exculpates, basically proves that Greg didn't do it, so they couldn't do anything. They didn't do anything. They didn't arrest him for 2 decades. They had to come up with some new idea. The new idea was, let's arrest him at the same time we can get this Jennifer lady to say what we want her to say. And then we'll use Jennifer at trial to point the finger at Greg. They didn't go down the right paths. 2018, you hear about them interviewing Petzel, and you hear about Mr. Petzel not being sure of his own memory and saying, essentially, I don't know, I'm not sure. But there was another person who was there with me when I think this happened. That guy was Kevin Alexander. Smeester never called Kevin Alexander after that to confirm or deny someone whose memory was unshaken, because they already were thinking about what they were going to do. Just have Jennifer fill in the holes. They made the decision to give her immunity because they were only narrowly looking at him, when absolutely the evidence shows you she could easily have done this too. And they cannot rule that out. Yeah, at the end, if you look at this case and you say, you know what, all the things that we've seen, all these missteps, all these problems, Jennifer is equally as guilty, and she could be equally the one that pulled the trigger. If that's what you think, and even if you're not convinced of that beyond a reasonable doubt, if you think to yourself, that's more likely, that's a logical possibility, you have to vote not guilty. Because what the court's going to do is the court's going to read you the actual definition of reasonable doubt. And that definition, like we said, it's written by a bunch of lawyers, uses these words like wavers and vacillates. But let me tell you all a story that I tried to use to show you that the size of that doubt can be as big or as small as you want it to be, as long as it's logical, as long as it's reasonable. So here's the story. When I was a kid, younger, back in the kind of mid-'80s.
Objection, facts not in evidence.
He's argument. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Al. When I was a kid, back in the mid-'80s, there were these people up north who took some Tylenol and they were poisoned. Some of y'all may actually remember this. What happened is somehow some of these Tylenol pills were tainted with cyanide. And there were people up north that just randomly took them, and unfortunately they passed away. And you would see on the national news, you know, back when we had the TV with 5 channels and you had to get up and click it, but you would see on national news that they're clearing out all the supermarkets of Tylenol. Tylenol, actually, the manufacturer issued a national recall because a couple people died from this poison. So this is the way I like to think about it, or this is the way I want you all to think about it. Let's say you're down here in Pensacola and you're watching on the national news that they're clearing out all the Tylenol on the shelves, and you got yourself a bottle back in your medicine cabinet, back in some kind of drawer. Would you go and take one pill from that bottle? Even though the chances of that bottle being connected to wherever the stuff up north was manufactured is insanely slight. Wouldn't you throw that thing away?
Objections quantifying the standard.
All right, move on, Mr. Crawford. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just interrupt for a minute, Mr. Crawford. I'm going to give you the law that applies in the state of Florida. The attorneys are allowed to argue based on reasonable inferences from the evidence and to explain the law to you, but ultimately that will come from me, okay? And each one of you will have that packet. Go ahead, Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. The court's going to give you this packet y'all going to take with you. That's the black and white letter law. I'm just trying to give y'all some common sense to look at it. And at the end, I would submit you wouldn't even touch that pill bottle, you would throw it away. Because your doubt about what's in it is logical. And that's what we're talking about at the end of the day. Is did the state rule out every, no matter how big or how small, logical possibility? And I would tell you they didn't. Because that's what happened. And even if you don't think that's exactly what happened, even if you think that's a possibility, that's something that could, if that is in your mind, you have to find Mr. Malarik not guilty. Because the only other way is if you have such an abiding conviction that this did not happen, that doesn't waver and vacillate, that's the only way. And I would submit, if it's more likely than not, possible, maybe, it's logically possible, you've got to find him not guilty. It's their job to put on the best case. It's their job to tell the best story. It's their job to give you the most credible people. The judge is going to tell you about how you judge credibility. I want y'all to follow that instruction and look at the people that they provided, including Mr. Smeester, and look at who we provided. Do you think Mr. Deaton was not trying to be forthright from you? I know he was, like, the guy was stuck in an oil rig. He's a worker. That's who he's been his whole life. But do you think he wasn't being forthright when he was answering y'all's questions like that? We ask you to find Mr. Malarik not guilty because they can't rule out all these logical possibilities. Thank you.